These stories are first-hand accounts shared by Reddit users, detailing unsettling real-life encounters that left lasting impressions. Each narrative provides a chilling glimpse into moments of danger, survival, and eerie coincidences that might make you rethink your surroundings. Disclaimer: these accounts were originally published by Reddit users and are presented as personal experiences. While they are described as true events, their accuracy relies on the original storytellers. The details shared here are intended for awareness and cautionary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Story 1. The Dog in the Road. This particular event happened almost a year ago, sometime in mid-October. A couple friends and I drove out to visit an old friend of ours from high school, George, who now lived about an hour out of the city. We spent the whole day with him and it was really late when we finally decided to start the drive back home. My friend Lisa was passed out in the passenger seat. She had had a few drinks and decided to spend the ride home asleep. My other friend Sam was sitting in the back seat behind Lisa and was playing a game on her smartphone. I, of course, was driving. I was following the GPS's instructions back to the freeway. At that moment, we were driving down a dark street with thick trees bordering both sides. Everything was pretty peaceful, with the only sounds I could hear being that of the car moving along the road and the radio on low volume. Suddenly, my car let out a loud jolt and it felt as if I had hit something. Sam let out a shocked scream while Lisa remained dead asleep. I slammed on the brakes and the car came to a halt. I was breathing heavily when I asked what the hell had just happened. Sam peered through the back window and gasped. She turned to me with an angry look on her face and shouted that I had just hit a dog. I looked through the back window and, sure enough, a dog was lying in the road a few yards behind the car. Sam is a pretty big animal lover, so I wasn't surprised to see her get pissed at me. She was about to open her door and rush to the animal's aid when I stopped her. Once I had gotten over the shock of running over a dog, I got a feeling in my gut that told me that something was off. I'm no braggart, but I consider myself to be a very attentive and safe driver. My eyes were on the road at all times, and I distinctly remember not seeing any dog in the road prior to the car jolting. Yes, it was dark, but I was sure that I would have at least seen the dog in the headlights before hitting it. I looked through the back window and took a closer look at the dog, or at least as much as I could make out in the reddish light coming from my tail lights. It was a fairly big dog. At least a golden retriever or something like that. One particular detail caught my attention. I could see the dog's tail wagging. Now, I'm no expert on the mannerisms of animals, but I was sure the last thing a dog would do after being hit by a car would be to wag its tail. After a moment of thought, I pressed my foot down on the accelerator and sped off. Sam snapped at me and ordered me to go back, but I told her that something was wrong with the whole situation. She continued to argue, but she fell silent as she turned back towards the back window. She asked, "What the heck?" with a shaken voice. I looked in the rearview mirror. Though it was dark, I was able to make out the silhouettes of 3 large figures emerging from the trees on the side of the road. The dog was now up on its feet and jumping around joyfully. The 3 figures looked in our direction as I pressed my foot down on the gas harder and sped off. Sam and I remained silent for the rest of the ride home. It wasn't until a few days later that we told Lisa about it. We've been back to visit George a few times since then, but we always make sure to leave before sunset. Still, I dread to think about what would have happened if we had gotten out of the car. Story 2. Out of gas. Okay, here's my obligatory "I lurk here all the time" thing. I read this subreddit quite a bit. I've thought a lot about submitting my own experience, and now I finally am. In retrospect, things turned out fine, but it was really alarming for me at the time. I grew up in an extremely rural Midwestern state. My family lived in the country between 2 small towns. I had attended school in both small towns and knew most of the families in the area either by face or last name. One night it was about 10 or 11 and I was leaving a high school basketball game in Town A. I was around 15 and driving on my school permit past curfew. I had borrowed my uncle's car, an early 90s Toyota with a leak in the gas tank that caused me to run out of gas before I made it more than 5 or 6 miles out of town, and I had about 7 left to go. I was on a long stretch of road that served as a shortcut between 2 main highways in the aforementioned towns and wasn't heavily traveled. There were a few houses, but they were stretched far apart, and at the time, as well as to this day, cell phone reception was very spotty. I waited a while and finally a nice, newer red truck with an extended cab, a toolbox in the back, and a construction company logo on the side pulled up. It was a Friday or Saturday night, and there was a man inside with a woman and two girls. He offered me his phone. I remember noticing it was a track phone, which my friends and I at the time referred to as crack phones because you can't trace the owners and they are frequently used by drug addicts. They're also used a lot by people who can't afford a standard phone plan, but the family was driving a really nice vehicle and they seemed super clean cut, so it struck me as odd. The phone got no reception. I tried calling my parents a few times and finally gave up. The truck had been headed away from Town B towards Town A, where I had just come from, so when they offered me a ride I thought nothing of it. I had a gas can in the trunk and all of my friends lived in Town A, so I figured they could drop me off at the gas station on the way to their destination and I could find a ride back with somebody I knew. When I got in the car I was caught off guard by the way the woman, who I assumed was his wife, and the two girls, who I assumed were their children, were dressed. Conservative families, even Amish and Mennonites aren't uncommon where I'm from, but for the man being otherwise modern, wearing jeans, driving a sort of flashy truck, and owning a cell phone, the females' clothing surprised me. They all wore long heavy skirts with button-up blouses and thin bonnets on their heads. One of the girls seemed to have a disability and made grunting noises every so often. Other than her noises, the women were completely silent. Everything seemed fine to me until the man driving turned around and started driving the opposite way of the direction he had been driving. The closest town the other way was still 15 or more miles, and it seemed out of his way. Out of politeness I reminded him that I had come from Town A, knew everyone there, and could find a ride home. It was late and I figured he needed to get his family where they were going. That's when he told me that he was from Town B and that he had a full gas can waiting at his house, and that he would take me there and bring me back to my car to fill it up. Still trying to be polite, I told him it was unnecessary, and my house was on the way to Town B, just a few miles away and he could drop me off there. He didn't reply. I started to feel like something was off. I'm from an area where people go out of their way to help others, but it seemed like too much. I had insisted numerous times that he didn't have to drive nearly 30 miles out of his way to get me gas. He could simply drop me off on his way to his destination, or if he wanted to make sure I made it home fine, he could drop me off at home. In my uneasiness, I started making small talk. I asked him his name, and his last name was unfamiliar to me, which was surprising, but not totally unbelievable, coming from a town of around 3,000 people where I had spent the first decade of my life, and where both of my parents still worked. I remember wishing that I had paid attention to the construction company name on the side of the truck, since most companies in my area were named after a family. As we got closer to the turnoff to my house, I started to get more frantic. I realized that these people, who didn't even seem overly friendly, were insisting that we drive completely out of the way, late at night, in a rural community, to fix a fairly commonplace mishap. I had no idea who they were, I had never seen them before, I had no cell phone reception, and their cell phone was undetectable. Even if it wasn't what they were trying to do, making me disappear would be a pretty easy task. I started kind of shrieking that they just dropped me off at my house, but nobody in the car seemed like they heard me. Finally, in a fit of panic I screamed at the top of my voice, "This is my turn. Take me home. Please take me home right now." Finally, for the first time the wife spoke up, yelling at the man angrily and somewhat annoyed, "Just fucking take her home." Outside of the girls grunting, the car fell silent. He swerved angrily onto my road, pulled into my driveway, let me out and then reversed out of the driveway so fast that the tires spit gravel and I couldn't even see the license plate or the name of the company through the dust. I ran inside and woke up my parents to tell them what happened. They just yelled at me because I was driving past curfew. I don't know for sure what the intentions were, and maybe they just wanted to help, but I felt really uneasy the whole time. Not as scary as some stuff on here, but that's my experience. Story 3. My brother-in-law saved me. This happened around 3 years ago. I was living with a roomie and going to school, and I was around 22, I'm a female. It was a weekday evening, and my roommate had informed me that she was going out clubbing and staying over at another friend's house. She had invited me, but I didn't really feel like going. Instead, I made plans to sit on my ass, watch junk TV, and work on homework. Around 10 p.m., I went to the gas station to get some candy and energy drinks. I remember that day pretty well because I had gotten out of classes pretty early and had just gotten my hair done, and I was feeling pretty confident and cute. I went into the gas station, and there were 3 guys, probably in their 20s, guys just lurking around. They just looked like your average frat boys, and I remember that one had shaggy blonde hair and was covered in tattoos. I noticed one of them nudged the other and nodded in my direction as I picked out my snacks, but I didn't pay much mind. They paid before I did and left. After I got my stuff, I walked out to the parking lot and saw them sitting in a beat-up, shitty car, and all 3 of them seemed to be staring at me. I hopped in my car and headed back to my house, which was literally only a few minutes from the gas station, and they started their car and followed. I didn't think much of it, figuring they were probably just heading the same direction as I was. However, I lived pretty deep in a subdivision with a lot of turns, and after a minute of pulling in and making several turns, I noticed they seemed to be following me. I got nervous since I knew I was home alone, so I kept driving past my house. I pulled out of the neighborhood and back onto the main road, and they were still following. I just drove for a while, and they sped up and really started getting close. Then they started flashing their lights and actually pulled up next to me and rolled their window down. The part of me that has faith in humanity thought, what the fuck? Do I have a low tire or something? But when I looked over and saw them leering at me, I knew it wasn't anything like that, and I immediately began to panic a little. We were on a more deserted stretch of road now, and they were swerving almost like they were going to bang into my car, but I just sped up. All I could think was, should I drive to the police station? It's like 15 minutes away from here and there's a ton of stoplights on the way. What if I have to stop and they block my car or something? Fortunately, by this point I was getting somewhat close to my sister's house. She lives pretty close to me, about 15 minutes away, but in the opposite direction of the police station. My hands were shaking and I was trying to navigate the road with these ducknozzles speeding up and slowing down and trying to nudge me off the road, but I picked up my phone and dialed my sister. She answered on the 4th ring. Without preamble, I immediately asked her if Josh, her husband, was home. She sounded confused but said yeah. Josh is in the military and I knew he owned guns. He's a good guy, but we didn't really talk much and I never felt particularly close to him or anything. Tell him to get his gun and come out to the driveway, please. By this point I was near tears. I dropped the phone, and one of those fucks threw something, I think a plastic Coke bottle, at my driver's side window when they sped up near me. I finally saw my sister's house and pulled into her driveway. The entire house was dark. No porch light. Nothing. I was so fucked. I misheard her. They weren't even home, and there aren't any neighbors that would be close enough to run to. The guys pulled up behind me so I couldn't back out of the driveway and they all jumped out. They all started walking up to my car, and one of them even reached for the handle and yanked on it. By this point I was fumbling for my phone again. Do I have a weapon here? Should I grab my phone and try to run? Should I back over these bastards or just stay locked in the car? In the split second that I looked up, 2 things happened. First, I made eye contact with the shaggy-haired blonde guy, who was the one yanking on my door. He didn't look angry, or drunk, or anything. His eyes were dead and predatory. While I was frozen in terror, he looked cold, like he had done this kind of thing before or something. The other guys were trying my other doors, but I couldn't break eye contact with the blonde, who was inches from my face and only separated by a glass window. Second, I finally saw a shape move behind him in the darkness, and I heard a loud bang. All the guys stopped and looked, and my hero, my brother-in-law, stepped out of the shadows, creeping up from behind the house. He pointed his gun at them and told them to get the fuck out of there. They ran back to their car and sped off, screaming profanities at Josh and me. When they left, my sister ran outside and brought me in. The driveway scene sounds in writing like it took a long time, but in reality, it was only a few minutes. Because of that, and because of how dark it was, we didn't get the guy's plate number. We called the police and they came out to get our statements. They said they would have someone patrol the area to keep an eye out for any cars that were the same make/model/color, but that it would be hard to catch the guys without the license plate number. Unfortunately, nothing ever came of it. They never caught those assholes. I can only wonder what they wanted with me, what they were planning for me, or what would have happened if Josh hadn't been there. Story 4. The phone went dead. This happened when I was in my early teens in the late 80s. My family lived in a very secluded, forested area. We had a long driveway and our small home sat on a square acre of mowed grass with woods on two sides. I was alone late one night, talking with a buddy from school. I often rode my bike to town over the summer and he invited me to come over and spend the night. It was a 20-mile trip over completely empty country roads, but it was always an adventure and I seldom hesitated to go when I had a place to stay. I told him it was a sure thing. I'd call my mother at work and then start my ride. Here's where it gets creepy. Once I hung up the phone and started getting dressed, all black. I picked up the phone again to call Mom. The line was dead. This had never happened before. It was a sturdy rotary phone and we never had problems with it. My thoughts instantly went to the small phone box on the back of the house. It was a tiny, round junction with nothing but a rubber covering. Behind the cover was the exposed connection between the phone pole and our inside line. The wires were twisted together and capped but completely vulnerable. I questioned why I would even think about that. Why would I jump to conclusions about the cause of the dead line? I was overwhelmed with a feeling of dread that didn't make sense and I was wrestling with my thoughts. I decided to behave as though I was in real danger but calm myself by focusing on how unlikely it was and how my imagination was probably getting the best of me. But I could not shake the feeling that I was in trouble. I finished dressing and strapped a buck knife to my hip. The old Rambo knives with the compass in the stock. It was cheap but very big. I moved quietly and planned how I would leave the house. I remember this very well. I would slide out the front door and pull it closed behind me, locked. I would not be able to get back in. I would grab my bike from against the wall on the enclosed porch, spin around and use my elbow to press the button of the handle on the screen door and jump down the concrete steps. I'd hop on my bike and speed down the drive. It was very dark outside, but there were bright lights in the front and rear of the house that created big pools in the yard. That's all the light I would have. I executed my maneuver just as I planned, but my elbow slipped off the button on the handle and banged into the door as it opened, and within seconds I was pumping down the gravel drive. I turned my head to the left, filling my ears with the roar of air I was cutting through, and stopped pedaling, my eyes fixed on the rear of the house. I was 100% sure someone was coming. I don't know how or why. It was only for a moment, but I didn't look away despite my own skepticism. At the last instant I saw him. A man wearing dark clothes and a ski mask came tearing out of the lit yard around the back of the house and plunged into the deep shadow along the side heading for the front, where I had been only seconds ago. I was invisible, wearing black from head to toe, and instead of running straight for me, he went for the porch where the commotion I just made had come from. I turned forward and leaned into the pedals. I could barely see the driveway, but I had ridden my bike down it many times at night and I could make out the large stone gate posts before the dirt road. I almost wrecked turning the corner but recovered and speeded away. About a mile further and I finally stopped at the intersection to a paved road. My heart was pounding in my chest and my forehead was sweaty. I stood there for a bit and got my breathing under control while I tried to digest what had just happened. My thoughts were racing. I knew damn well what I saw, but I was out of danger. All I could do was press on. My neighbors were Amish, no phone. I wouldn't have known what to say anyway. When I got to my friend's house much later, I told him what happened and called my mother. She listened and didn't give me a hard time, but I could tell she didn't know what to think. She wouldn't be home till morning and said she'd be careful. And that was it. I had heard laughter once from the edge of the woods and things in the yard had been moved on occasion, but no one else had these experiences and I assumed it was backwards Amish kids fooling around. Nothing had ever really happened before. I doubt Amish kids would know how to disconnect a phone line though. Story 5. That time we had to use our code word. It was 2012 and my best friend Hannah had convinced me to join her on a weekend trip up north. She had, after searching for the longest time, found her dream car and was planning on traveling the 900 kilometers to the very north of Sweden to buy it. It was a second-hand two-door Suzuki Vitara in a purplish kind of color, and I must admit I didn't share her obsession with it. But, with her being the closest thing to a sister that I will ever get, I was happy to join her nonetheless. Hannah and I have always had each other, from the cradle and onwards. Sharing each other's love for adventure, we have traveled the world together. At the time this happened, we were both 21 and had recently returned from a trip in Asia. The man who was selling her the car had agreed to meet us at the small airport in Uma. When we arrived shortly before lunchtime, it had started to snow heavily. The first snow of the season, no less. The parking lot was almost empty, and when I saw the man standing outside the Vitara, I felt immediately concerned. He was dressed like a hunter. A lot of people in this area of the country live a lifestyle with hunting and fishing, so nothing strange with that really. But still, there was something about him that made me uneasy. He was nice though, smiling and waving to us, shaking hands with us both before walking us around the car and pointing out all the tiny little flaws. He showed us the work he had done on the car, and showed the paperwork from the recently done engine repairs. He made the impression that he didn't want to hide anything. On the contrary, he made a show out of being very forthcoming and honest. The snowing had now intensified and we were getting cold. He opened the car door for us and said, "I got the paperwork at home, let's close the deal over some coffee." Against all my instincts, I climbed in after Hannah, both of us now trapped in the back seat. I had no reason to feel threatened by this man who had been nothing but pleasant to us, other than the alarm bells going off inside my head. I can't tell what it was that made me feel that way, but there must have been some sign that something was wrong, something that my subconscious tuned into. The man was constantly talking funny, since people from the north of Scandinavia are famous for never speaking a word more than absolutely necessary. He showed the stereo, told us about the features of the car, about the places we drove past, about the wildlife and nature. There was not a silent moment. After about 20 minutes, I started to notice that we were in no way moving in the direction of civilization. Instead, it seemed we were driving further and further into the vast wilderness. It struck me that he had us in the back of a two-door car, driving us into unknown territory, and no one knew where we were. I looked at Hannah, who was happily listening to the man telling stories about the area, and I noticed she didn't look at all worried. Maybe I was totally overreacting. We drove past a group of people standing by the side of the road, hunters planning their day or taking a break maybe. This truly is a very different Sweden compared to the city. The car finally stopped outside a small wooden cottage with no neighboring houses, apart from a small cabin that we drove past a few hundred meters down the road, but it had looked empty. We followed the man inside. He was still talking non-stop and continued to do so until the moment the door closed behind us. Hannah kept asking things about the car, and I could sense that her voice had a new undertone now, a thin, sharp tenseness that made me wonder if she too had started to feel that something wasn't right. "I'll put the kettle on," he said, and as he passed us to go into the kitchen, he let his hand touch Hannah's hair and he smiled smugly. "May I use the bathroom?" I asked politely and made my way to the door with the little red heart on. I was washing my hands when I saw something in the stained bathroom mirror. Something was hidden behind the water cistern. I pulled out a rolled-up plastic folder, and as I turned the pages, I felt my blood run cold. It was very violent porn pictures that looked like they had been cut out from magazines, and they were glued to the paper, surrounded by cut-out pieces of handwritten text. Put together, it made a horrifying story about how a woman was lured into a car with the promise of getting to buy the car cheaply, and then it quickly turned into a horror story. I know this will sound silly, but when we traveled together, Hannah and I had a code word for whenever we felt it was time to get out of a situation. We had never needed to use it, just joked about it, but now it came in handy. I walked out of the bathroom and looked at Hannah and said, "Potatoes. We forgot to buy potatoes. And that's too bad, because good God, do we need some." The look on my face must have told her that the situation was no joke, and she said, "Oh, should we get some as soon as possible?" "The sooner the better," I replied. Hannah, always pretty and charming and capable of great acting, casually walked over to the man in the kitchen, tapped his shoulder and said, "Excuse me, but I was wondering if I can go have a quick look at the cam belt?" He huffed something about it being in good shape and handed over the keys. We got into the car and speeded off faster than the weather strictly speaking allowed. We left the car at the airport and hoped we hadn't made a terrible mistake. What if he reported it stolen? It would be embarrassing to explain to the police. But nothing happened. He didn't follow us, didn't report it in. We had to take the train since we had no plane tickets. The original plan had been to take the car home. And we didn't want to linger close to the airport in case he came looking for us. Later Hannah asked what made me use the code word, and I told her about what I had found. It might just have been a fantasy, a sick game, and maybe he would never have done anything to us. But right then and there I was convinced we would die if we didn't get out. Thank God Hannah didn't need any convincing or proof, just the code word. I truly think that if we hadn't talked about it so many times before, about how we would handle a situation where we need to get out fast, things would have ended differently. Both of us knew that if either ever used the code word, it's time to get out, no questions asked. Just move. Story 6. We never made it inside. I have been a long-time reader and decided to make an account to share this story with all of you. Not simply because it has stuck with me, but because I'm sure that you will have a few great hypotheses about what happened to me that night, and who it was exactly that I encountered. It started several years ago, my and my friend's interest in urban exploration. I was a junior in high school at the time, which was when everyone started to earn a lot more freedom, so we took the chance to be out late whenever we could. Now, keep in mind that I live in a major city in central Colorado, so the nightlife is never lacking. We could always find something to do, and were especially drawn if there was an element of danger. We wouldn't always plan these trips, but we made sure as hell that if we were going into any old building in the dark, we would have a knife and a flashlight for safety. We never really had to defend ourselves, but we came very close one evening. It must have been around November, because there wasn't snow on the ground, but it was a chilly evening. Directly across the street from the abandoned hospital, which we have hypothesized is still around from the TB era, is a hospital that is newer and in use. The two are connected by an underground tunnel, which I can only assume was a way to move bodies without alerting the patients. This is a common feature among old hospitals. We had been inside the hospital a few times, but never found anything strange. Only the occasional sign of others having been or lived there. What was piquing our interest that night was the abandoned library next door to that hospital. It was connected but only by exterior walls. To get inside, you could not cut through the hospital, but instead had to hop over a tall wall and climb a very high fence. A few of us had backpacks, containing the aforementioned safety precautions and a couple bottles of water, so nothing too heavy or valuable that would get damaged when tossed over the obstacles before us. A little ways off the road, it was dark if you clung to the buildings. We did for a while before stepping behind a small patch of shrubbery, which we determined was an easy way over the first wall since the only other way to gain access was by a chained, unclimbable gate at the bottom of a set of stairs facing away from the ledge. Both were parallel with the library, so when tucked back in that corner behind the bushes, no one could see us from the street. I don't believe I went first, but I did not remain behind to be last over that wall. It was too high up for me to jump and haul myself over, so I resorted to stepping on a pipe jutting out somewhere lower along the wall. It gave me a bit of a needed boost, and soon I was up and over, moving into the library's courtyard. Another girl and I waited for our two other girlfriends to join us. Upon an initial glance over the courtyard, there was no obvious way in. To our right was a dilapidated fountain, which I took joy in imagining spring forward a spray of water from its detailed stonework in the brighter summer months, people laughing and talking with the surrounding trees bringing them shade. Now, however, it had been in long disuse, and the earth at our feet was cold and hard. There were no signs of another soul for years, save the 15-foot chain link fence directly in front of us separating the courtyard in half. I could tell it hadn't seen the same weather as the rest of the courtyard, because the metal showed no signs of rust. That must be our way in, we agreed, because with a fence like that someone obviously wanted to keep us out. We hurled our bags over the fence, hearing them clank on the ground rather silently due to their lightness. I was the third over, because I have a slight fear of climbing and it took me a bit to mentally prepare myself. I made it to the top of the fence in a short time, then sat at the top straddling it with a leg on either side. I had two girls on the other side in front of me, and one behind me who was telling me to hurry up. I spent a good couple minutes up there doing another mental preparation and some deep breathing, then climbed down to wait for the last girl. At the time, I was thinking that it had been one of the scariest things I've done in a while, because I tend to avoid climbing at all costs. Of course, this is an irrational fear, as I have never fallen, but that phobic fear didn't even compare to what happened next. The last girl's feet hit the ground and all four of us split up in the smaller half of the courtyard, looking for any kind of entrance. We decided that breaking a window would be too loud and draw unwanted attention, not to mention we could get really cut up. So, that wasn't an option. Searching for a little longer, we didn't find anything that looked remotely plausible until we found a grate near the base of where two walls met. I couldn't believe we hadn't noticed it before, and upon closer inspection the grate was already moved slightly from its resting place, so it would be easy to lift the rest of the way. The smallest and least fearful of our group went first. After moving the grate there was a small drop down. It was no more than 3 feet down and 2 feet wide, but inside there was another drop down where we could see into the library basement. She hopped down into the small, square landing, only to almost immediately freeze. We looked amongst ourselves wondering what was wrong. "There's a guy down there," she said. "What? Where?" "I can see his outline," she said. I leaned forward and tried to make out a shape, but it was further down than my line of sight permitted and too dark. "Hello," she called out. He responded the same, asking who we were. "Just a couple of chicks," she spat out bluntly. What he said next sent chills down my spine, and it was as if I could feel the darkness radiating out of that hole in the ground. All of a sudden it was very still and quiet, like that darkness had spilled out and weighed all of us down in that gloomy courtyard. He said in what I can only describe as a lustful tone dripping with ill intent, "I'm addicted to following the sound of women's voices." My friend looked over at us blankly, but there was nervousness underneath. Unease. Something in his voice sounded like it wasn't an empty threat, like he wasn't just saying something creepy to get us to leave. She looked back to where he was and said slowly, "That's not cool." The man under that dark earth began laughing maniacally, and not in the kind of way a really good actor does. In the way that we could feel his utter insanity hit us like stale air. We looked at each other for what felt like hours in that gloomy courtyard, but I knew it was only a couple of seconds, because we all exchanged without even speaking that we had to get out of there. No. I was not about to risk some nutcase coming after us, even if we did outnumber him. The friend scrambled up out of the landing, and I was never over a fence faster in my life. 15-foot potential fall, and I didn't even have time to think about it. We didn't stop running until we were on the street and halfway down the block out of breath. I can still hear that laugh. "So, guy in a storm drain? Let's not meet." Story 7. Scottish Highlands. Me and my friend Annie were about 22-23, and we were both at uni in different cities at the time. When we were kids, her family and mine used to go on hiking/camping trips every year, and through high school and uni, me and Annie kept up the tradition. We did bits and pieces of the West Highland Way every year for a catch-up, took some climbing shoes and hung about a bit in the wilderness. We usually do it at the start of summer, but this year we were both snowed under with work and exams and stuff and couldn't get the time off. But the time we both had enough days spare, it was mid-October. I was hesitant about heading right up into the Highlands that late in the year and said we should just miss it, and she just laughed at me and told me to grow a pair. So, October it was. You don't really argue with Annie. We met at a train station about halfway up and aimed for a 3-day hike. To be honest, I was kind of excited, even though I knew it would probably suck. I really love Annie, and I miss her when we're away. I saw her purple waterproofs, she dropped her bag, we hugged and started walking, chatting away about life etc. etc. This was the year she had her first placements. She's a doctor. Consultant, anyway, which is why she couldn't get time off. And I just restarted uni and was trying to get a flat sorted. Either way, we were chatting for hours while we walked. But if it was anyone else, I'd be having the worst time. Scottish weather is shite. I don't know if anyone has been here in winter, but it sucks. Especially later in the year. It gets dark by about 4 p.m. and it chucks it down all day every day, apart from the days where it's moody and overcast and crappy. Or snowing. We've got a Scots word for it. Drike. Dark, shite weather, can't see a thing, everyone's miserable. It was absolutely pissing it down and in the end we just gave up. By the time we met at the station it was about 10 a.m., and we forgot it got dark early, so by the time the sun set we'd only got about halfway to the place we usually stop. We hiked along a bit further until I'd had enough and told her I wasn't up for going any further and it'd be cool if we just wild camped. Or, as she puts it, I said, "Annie, put the fucking tent up, I'm fucking soaked, I don't fucking care." So we shove the tent up on the first flat bit we find, struggling in the dark, then climb in. Next morning, we woke up. And we found out we'd pitched the tent in the bog, about 2 feet from the burn, and literally everything was soaking wet. On top of that, we were miles and miles from the next train station. So we pack up, raging, and keep going. We discuss it a bit, more of me going, "I'm fucking soaked," and in the end decide to head for a bothy we knew was nearby, which at least had shelter. If you don't know what a bothy is, it's basically an open shed thing where you can sleep in with a bunch of other hikers, get to know folk, and, importantly, not have to worry about where to camp. Also, it's free, so you're not stung by tourist hotel prices. We pick up the pace a lot and don't really stop for food or anything, because it's all damp and sad anyway. Having left at 9 a.m., we get there for 3 p.m. when the sun starts to set. It's dark and a bit grotty, but there's nobody else there, so we feel like we've scored. By the time we've got dinner and played some torchlight cards, she's looking a bit spaced, so she heads off to sleep early. I'm knackered and damp, and I'm so fucking glad to be somewhere dry. I just unpack my sleeping bag and do the same thing. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was woken up by Annie having a seizure. It's not a big deal, this happens a lot, so I didn't need to call an ambulance or anything. I just jump out my sleeping bag and undo hers so she doesn't hurt herself. I sort of cushion her a bit with her fleece and keep an eye on her. She gets over the worst of it and she's lying there quiet while I'm talking to her as she comes round. At this point, I glanced up and noticed that sometime after we'd gone to bed, someone else had come into the bothy. There was a dark red bundle of sleeping bag in the corner and a rucksack, and Annie's fit had woken whoever was in there. This guy was coming over to us. He seemed nice enough and genuinely worried about her. "Do you need any help?" I don't get a chance to look him over, because I'm juggling making sure Annie's okay and making sure this guy doesn't call mountain rescue and make us look like tits. No, she's okay. It happens all the time. She's medicated and things, it just happens. She'll be okay in a bit. Sure. Honestly. Cheers for the help, but we can't really do anything. He comes closer and he starts helping. Not in a way that immediately alerts me, but in an annoying way. Like, he starts trying to put her in a recovery position, which I'd already done, and even though I'd told him 100 times I've known her since I was 5 and I know what I'm doing, he didn't listen. He's breathing really heavily and he smells a bit moldy. Eventually, I just tell him to back off a bit and give her some space. And then he smiles at me, which was weird and creepy, and in the half-dark sort of wrong because it didn't meet his eyes. This guy looks off as well. He's got his massive, huge fucking beard like he lives out here and a weird accent. Sort of Scottish, but sort of something else as well. I thought he was maybe an oil rigger or something. I've met a few in Aberdeen, and he seemed to fit the bill. His eyes were really, really dark and his face was so pale he made me look tanned. Also, who the fuck is still hiking in this weather, this late? Who gets to a bothy, alone, after 6 p.m.? He moves closer again to look at Annie, then I tell him more firmly that I've got her, and I don't need help. I feel like I'm being a bit mean, but I'm starting to get stressed out because I can't see properly and Annie's been out for fucking ages. By now it's getting on to 15 or 20 minutes. It shouldn't take this long for her to come round. Like, it's usually at least half this. Also, I notice she's got her eyes open, which isn't that unusual, but I'm almost 90% sure she didn't when she started fitting. Then I notice she's looking at me. Not zoned out or anything, but actually looking at me. It takes me a few seconds, but I realize she is. "Lauren," she whispers, hardly moving her lips. She doesn't really blink either, but her eyes are looking right at mine. Don't react. I don't know why, but I'm so scared I just do as I'm told. She said once she had this patient who used to talk bollocks after a fit, like they were hallucinating. So a part of me thinks she's doing the same, but another part of me has noticed that she's now staring over my shoulder, where the red sleeping bag man was. I go to slowly turn around, but she grabs my hand. I'd put her in the recovery position, but from where she's lying, she's able to sort of squeeze my hand without moving too much. So I freeze, keep looking at her, then keep my voice at a normal volume. I don't know what else to do, so keep talking to her. saying like, Annie, it's me, can you hear me, all of that stuff. Then her eyes flicker back to me and she whispers again. She's basically mouthing it. If I didn't know her looks, I would have struggled. Lauren, ask him for help. Don't panic. We're really fucking scared now. So I slowly let go of her hand and turned around. And that's when I see what she's been looking at. The red sleeping bag man had been sitting in a corner watching us, still smiling. Only now he's got something in his hand under his jacket. I thought he'd got climbing gear with him, but all I can see is rope and no harnesses or anything. And it's not climbing tape he's got, it's a massive roll of something darker. He's just staring at us waiting. I don't know what else to do. So, I move an inch or so away from her and look the guy right in his creepy eyes. Hi. Sorry, hey, can you give me a hand? She's not waking up. I'm really scared. He doesn't even move. I can feel my voice shake, not acting or anything. I'm genuinely shitting it. I remember before when he was helping me that he kept trying to touch her hair and things, so in a moment of blind panic I asked if he could move her hair out of her face so I could check if she was breathing. I don't know why. I'm not as smart as she is, but I've seen too many crime thrillers and sort of assumed it'd be a psychological thing. Maybe he liked that she was vulnerable? Whatever. It worked. He gets up, dead slowly, and moves towards us. He puts his hand on her hair and starts really smiling. I can hear him breathing. It's really scaring the fuck out of me. Especially when he leans close and says, "You're going to be my favorite." Annie has her eyes closed now. I put my hand in hers, then I could feel it. She's squeezing. Not like, calm down, it's okay, squeezing but steady. 3, then 2, then 1. And at 1, she opens her eyes and swings for him at the same time I do. Punches him right in the throat, and from where I'm sitting I can get him square in the groin. She decks him again, like a fucking boss, because she's a Highlander, and I automatically grab his rope. He's not exactly going down without a fight, but between us we've got hiking sticks, massive boots, elbows and adrenaline, and in about a minute we get him tied and taped up. We grab our shit and get outside as fast as humanly possible, then do something I never thought I'd ever see Annie do in my life. Call mountain rescue. They come to get us in about an hour, and when we get to town we give a full statement to the police, making sure we didn't get done for GBH. A few months later, we find out they let the fucker go. He didn't actually do anything to us, according to the police, and there wasn't enough evidence to tie him to any other sexual assaults. Which is the worst part of this, because I can't even imagine what would happen if we didn't get as lucky. If Annie hadn't sussed him, he'd have attacked us in our sleep. So, red sleeping bag man, let's not meet again. Ever. Story 8. My mum used to clean houses. She quit after this. In the mid-80s, my mum was a cleaner in Australia. She would clean houses in suburban areas and would sometimes do houses in rural or wine regions. We lived near both. She would leave business cards at the local shops and got most of her business this way, and some through referrals and word of mouth. One day she got a call from a lady who sounded like she was around 60, asking Mum to clean her old farmhouse. She made a lot of odd demands and Mum would usually meet clients before taking on new business. In this case, the lady did not want to meet Mum and said she would leave the keys under the front doormat. Mum agreed mainly because the lady was quite obviously wealthy and was offering to pay Mum substantially more than she would reasonably expect. Mum went to the house on a Monday morning and said she already felt unnerved by the long driveway. The house was essentially in the middle of a very large and very empty property. She found the keys and started cleaning. About an hour into the clean, she hears the back door shut. Mum was told no one would be at the house, so she immediately felt unsafe. She stood frozen in the kitchen for what she said felt like 3 to 4 minutes, although she said it could have been much longer. There was no other car on the property. She wanted to leave immediately but had 2 rooms left to do, both were bedrooms. She said as time passed and she heard nothing else, she decided that perhaps it was nothing, or perhaps something had fallen and it wasn't the door after all. She walked up the hallway and stepped into the bedroom. All over the bed were black and white photos. As Mum got closer, she realized the photos were all of her. Some were taken at our family home, and many others were taken at other houses Mum would clean. Some through windows or over fences. She used the house phone to call the police and immediately drive to the end of the driveway. The lady ended up being investigated but continued to claim that it was a break-in. After some time, the police stopped with their search and we ended up moving to a new town 4 months later. Every time Mum tells me this story I get serious chills. Absolutely a true story too. To the day my mum thinks the lady had something to do with it. For what? And for what purpose? Story, mine. Friendly farm town folk. I just learned of this story over the weekend when my Uncle S was in town. He has always been a jokester and growing up, he'd always be pulling pranks and laughing. I don't think I'd ever seen him serious before this moment. He is a huge car fan and asked to see my new Infiniti G37 sedan, so I took him out in my grandpa's driveway to show him the car with my dad. We did the usual pop the hood and rev the engine type stuff, and we all pretended that we knew what we were looking at as we stared into the hood of the car, when my uncle said he wanted to tell us about something that happened to him in college that he felt would serve as a good lesson to me. This is honestly the first time I'd ever heard him talk very seriously, with a tone of fear in his voice. He trembled as he first started telling the story, and said that he hadn't ever told anyone about this before, but seeing me with my new car and the fact that I'm a young guy made him want to bestow knowledge upon me. My uncle went to a rural college. The campus was in the middle of a town of about 10,000 people. Most were college students or worked at the college, but there were some locals. He moved off campus his junior year and lived about 3 miles outside town and the bar districts. After having quite a few beers with his friends, he decided he better walk home since he had an exam that morning. As he was walking down the country road with cornfields on both sides of the road, a man in a truck pulled up who appeared to be a friendly farmer. He offered to give my uncle a lift to save him from the walk. My uncle, being drunk and not thinking straight, took him up on his offer. He got in the front seat and they took off. He gave the man directions to the house he lived in with his college buddies, and then about 5 minutes into the drive noticed that the man had gone past the turn he needed to take. He informed the man that his house was behind them and he needed to turn around, but the older farmer said that he'd lived in this town for 50 years and knew a shortcut he would teach him. That's when my uncle began to get suspicious. He started asking questions and surveying his situation. The farmer obviously had a final destination as he continued down the road, then eventually pulled into an old driveway with a very old barn that was falling apart. My uncle said the roof was halfway caved in. My uncle's plan was to bolt the second the man slowed down, so when the farmer slowed down and parked, my uncle pushed the unlock latch and gave the door a shove. The lock had been sawed off and only part of it popped up. At this point he knew he was in for it. The driveway was made of gravel and there was a very old playground set in the front yard that was completely rusted and falling apart. There was also a shed in the back of the property, behind the barn that he said had lights on, but the rest of the property was dark and only illuminated by the headlights of the truck and the moon. My uncle ended the story very abruptly with, "Then I fought him off and sprinted home, and said let's go back inside." My dad stared at him the rest of the night and he kept to himself. I don't think he wanted to admit it, but something obviously happened at that farm. Never accept rides from anyone. Story 10. Vagina Island. Back in 2009, I got a call from my friend Kay. This was 2 years after we went our separate ways for college. I was 20 at the time. He had begun to tell me of this island that we had to go to. We had grown up together and spent our youth exploring the ins and outs of our small Midwestern town, so I was all for it. He had explained to me that he and some of his friends had found it when they were exploring in the river. He had told me all about it and was excited to share his find with another person. I was jealous that I wasn't there when it was first discovered, but I got over it and got pumped to see what he had unearthed. It's been a running joke that I don't know how to swim, never did, probably never will, and the island lay in the middle of the river. Usually the waters weren't high, so he reassured me that all I had to do was wade behind him and our other friend S would be behind me in case I hit a sinkhole. Sucking up my nervousness of aquatic things, I agreed and we popped off our shirts and sunk into the muddy waters. The island looked close from the banks but took some time to get to in the chest-high waters, see Pic 1. As we floated with the current we made jokes and spent our time bullshitting. None of us had a camera due to the fact that we didn't want to get our phones wet, and who really cared, he had already taken pictures from his last quest, now was just time to show us. Once we pulled our bodies up onto the land we took a minute to breathe. Kay had taken his shoes off to keep them dry and left them with our shirts, but it wasn't a place to be without feet protection. Wild bushes and branches lay strewn about everywhere. The island looked fairly untouched. It was in the river next to a state park, but still deep enough down where people wouldn't bother it. We followed Kay's lead into this thistle, and after 4 or 5 minutes we found a clearing towards the center. In it lay what we were looking for. There was a giant cement ass of a lady sitting next to a lawn chair. This wasn't just some art project, it was well detailed. There was a marble stuffed in her to resemble a clit and was massive. We laughed and romped around, but I had a strange feeling on the island. It felt weird. My other 2 friends seemed a little creeped out but generally blew it off. It stuck with me. A few weeks later I decided that I have to go back to Vagina Island, appropriately coined by Kay, but my friends had no real interest in going again. About that time I was living in my first apartment with a roommate during college and had a few friends back home. My college was only an hour and a half away, so the travel was no big deal and was always worth it when I pulled into my old driveway. I had been talking to a girl online and decided that she, my friend E, my roommate J, and I would meet for the first time, and that I would take her to Vagina Island. It had a mystical pull to it, and those that I told didn't seem to believe me, so we agreed. J and I picked up E and eventually met up with A, who uneasily got into my car, but we all hit it off quick. The drive was about 40 minutes, so we stopped to buy basketball shorts that we could wear into the river. E had my wetsuit from my trunk that I had carried around for a couple years because I was young and it was humorous, and we picked up a waterproof disposable camera. We get ready to go and make it to the island. I'm unfamiliar with the layout since Kay led the way, so we wandered around until we were able to find where we needed to be. The first thing that caught my eye was that it was different than last time, just a few days before. The bottom of the lady is still there, see pic 3, but this time there is more, and it has grown creepiness in an intense manner. Next to the bottom half is a full-bodied woman, laying in a pale white cement, staring up at the sky. This immediately freaked us all out, especially after I had hyped up the vagina. She looked ghostly. She was wearing nothing but rain boots and her nipples had been painted gold. We each shot glances towards each other and then to her. Our first reaction was that it was a real person, so we inched slowly towards it and swiveled the rain boot. She cracked and showed wire reinforcements under it. I let out a huge sigh of relief under my breath and we continued to look around. I still had a weird feeling and joked about setting up a camera to catch this guy to see who he was. When looking through the trees to find a place for our imaginary camera is when I saw more. A vagina hung from a tree just over our shoulders. At this point we all start getting a bit freaked out and notice that there are candles by the chair. At the time I couldn't remember if I was so caught up in the excitement the first time or if these were new too. All it took was for one of us to say, "Let's go," and we all followed suit behind. It wasn't quite the fun carefree romp that I had promised. It wasn't long until the next afternoon I was sitting with E and we had decided that we needed to go back to Vagina Island. Perfect. Someone as intrigued by it as I was. We called up a different girl. S was a small girl and wasn't too thrilled about going, since we decided to go at 5 in the morning and see if we could catch the guy in the act. Upon packing up, we grabbed a couple of baseball bats and set out into the dark woods to make it to the river. Once reaching the water, we realized how badly we had underestimated the temperature of the river when the sun wasn't warming it up. We felt the chills go through our legs and up into our chests. S wasn't having it. We took turns carrying her on our shoulders to keep her dry, which did nothing to make waiting any easier, but at least she was a small girl. We made it and pulled out a flashlight and began to go through the thick of it. I felt an ominous fear grip me but said nothing. I couldn't be the friend that was too scared. I had grown up being that friend, so this time there was no backing down. Everything that was creepy in the daylight was even worse spotted by the moon. But we had made it. We stopped for a photo op before looking around, see pic 8. The first thing that caught my attention was the dead stare of the statue in the dirt. Leaves had fallen on her and we kicked some of them away. She looked different though. My heart started pounding as I realized that her vagina had been painted gold since we were there yesterday. We crept closer and kicked away some leaves. Once moving some, we noticed something that had been covered. There was a cement plaque next to her that read equestrian, which we made out to be equestrian. I inched away from the statue and tried to regain my cool composure. Had I smoked the way I do now, a pack may have already been gone. We all quickly looked around us to make sure that we were alone. There weren't any other sounds, but the two of us gripped our bats tight, hoping that we wouldn't have to save the lone girl trapped on an island at 5 in the morning. We caught the vagina hanging from the tree again, and shivers climbed up each spine individually. This time we noticed that it wasn't the only thing strung up from a branch. Right over my left shoulder was a collection of feathers, what appeared to be some kind of charm, and a shotgun shell. At this point we had all decided that there was no need to be the bigger man and said it was time to go. First the vagina, then the chair and candle, then the things in the tree. We had seen enough. This was all capped off by the fact that in just the short 20 hours we had been gone, somebody had been there working. I think E and I had made up our minds that we were no longer alone on this island. We started looking for something to take with us, for a trinket that would go unnoticed, and scrounge around for a few minutes before I noticed a piece of bark next to the chair. On it was a very detailed picture of a vagina, and written in black and it said, "Looking for 40-plus-year-old models." We were all pretty satisfied and filled with fear by this and took off back across the river. We stomped through, carrying S on our shoulders and making a lot of noise. With each splash came the thought that someone was behind me. The current of the water and the dark of the night made putting sounds to a specific spot. The cold of the water and struggle of the extra weight made my knees buckle, and S and I toppled into the river. We had never been so happy to be back on the other side. A few months went by and he sent me a text message. He had been walking through a park by his college, about an hour driving distance to the bank of the river. "Holy shit," was all that the text message said. It had a picture attached. It was the same guy's handwriting, paired with the same statement looking for models. Where E was at was deep in the woods of a park known for hiking by college students. It was a college park. I remember my mind jumping when I saw that picture. I had thrown away the tree bark about a week prior, due to just that. It was tree bark. None of us had gone back for some time. We spent a lot of time sharing our story with people, but never telling them where it was pinpointed. An island in the river by the state park gave a wide variety of options. It was our little secret. By now it is 2012 and E and I no longer talk. I had talked up Vagina Island with my friend Kai from Colorado, and when she came to visit for a week, I knew what we would be doing during one of the days. Pumped due to the fact that I hadn't been back in years and so much more could be there, I sped to the park and we broke off the trail towards the river. The summer was very dry last year and the tips of our shoes didn't even get wet. The entire river had dried up for the season. It was the first time I had ever seen the Platte River this low. As we walk towards the island I am talking it up, the sun is up, so I'm a bit braver, and we get into the thick of the woods. It didn't take long to notice that it was all removed. The giant vagina, the tree decorations, the chair, the candles, all of it. All that was left dangled from a tree. I walked up to it and saw that it was a bone of some sort. I assumed it was an animal and got closer to see that a dollar bill had been rolled up tightly and stuffed through it. I pulled the dollar out and we left disappointed. Until this day I have never found out any more about it. E and I had spent a lot of nights discussing calling the police or the park rangers and having them check it out, but we enjoyed our little secret. I regret not calling, and curiosity continues to eat at me. The Platte River is not thin and these statues were not small. We often bounced ideas back and forth of how he would get the cement there, or if he did his work on the island by simply hauling a bag of cement across and adding the water upon arrival. All of it will forever remain a mystery, and that may be the most difficult part about it, but also the most beautiful. Story 11. Why wouldn't they leave? Why weren't they moving? This happened to me when I was about 15 or 16. I had forgotten about this for ages, so despite being a lurker on this subreddit, I never thought to post it. A few months ago I told a few people about it, though, and their reactions made me realize it's probably worth throwing on here, because it really defies explanation and I really am curious what others would think of it. So years and years back when I was in high school, I had a few friends crashing at my place on the weekend. We were drinking a bit, watching horror movies, nothing too interesting. Later on we were polishing off whatever we had on us and sitting in my room in the dark, which was actually the den in the basement. My room sat at the back of the house, and the hallway led more or less straight into two other rooms that faced the front. Around 3 a.m. or so, we're just shooting the shit when one of us suddenly notices a bright white light just barely washing into my room, kind of spilling across the floor and highlighting all the dust dancing around in the air. It's a very bright, artificial-looking light. Think of the cheesy effects whenever the aliens showed up on X-Files. Curious about what was causing this and being the guy closest to the door, I sat up and walked into the hallway to investigate. As I entered the very short hallway leading to the front basement rooms, the light was already much brighter. I noticed that it was coming from the room on the left, which didn't have blinds yet, and so the basement window faced boldly onto the street, unobscured. I walked forward and stepped into the room and immediately froze in my tracks. Parked on the street and pointed straight at my house was a huge big rig kind of truck, minus the trailer. The high beams were on and filling the air, not to mention my house, with an eerie white light. To this day, I've never seen a space so lit up in the middle of the night. What really got me, though, was the two individuals standing directly in front of the truck, right at the edge of my lawn, staring at my house. He was a very typical trucker-looking type in a ball cap, broad-shouldered husky guy, mangy clothes from what little I could see. Beside him stood some girl that looked like a teenager from her build. All I could really make out was her scraggly hair. People say this a lot on Let's Not Meet, but I really did just intuit that something was off about these two right away, before I really had a reason to know that. What really got me was those fucking high beams. They stood in front of the truck, so although a very bright light was at their back, I couldn't make out one single detail about their faces. It freaked me the fuck out, it just looked wrong. Things really. But that's when I really picked up on what was so off about them. They were standing there completely motionless. Hands at their sides. No signs that they were talking to each other, no little shifts of body language. Not even moving their weight more from one foot to the other as any normal person would while standing still for long periods. They just fucking stood there, staring straight ahead. At my house. At me. This is around where I got the fuck out of that room and shut the door. I got my friends to come upstairs with me so we could scope these two out from above. It was one of those split-level kinds of houses. We looked down at them through the curtain and sure enough they hadn't budged. A truck still aimed straight at my house, high beams still bursting through the windows, two weirdos still standing completely still right in front of it. After considering many options, some smart, calling the police, and some completely retarded, confrontation, we opted to double-check that my door was locked and get some sleep. Since there were a few of us, we could have someone keeping an eye on them while others slept. I remember thinking it felt like keeping watch in the Vietnam War or something, or anyway that's what I thought, but when it was my turn to watch them they were gone. Apparently they just stood there, outside, in the autumn, for hours. And then went on their merry way. That's totally normal, right? What the actual fuck? Story 12. What's 911 in Australia anyway? So, I spend most of my summers in Australia helping out on my uncle's farm. In the family it's just him, my female cousin who's never home because of ballet school and my male cousin. My brother and I were there last summer when I was 14. I got up in the morning and walked into the kitchen, seeing a dude underneath the computer desk. He's just fixing the computer, he'll be done in an hour, my uncle had told me. My brother and my cousin went surfing while my uncle went to pick up something from the store. I get weird vibes from this bloke I've just been left alone with. He looks kinda like the guy from Smash Mouth but with a patchier beard and thinner hair. He keeps tinkering away at the computer and I slink down the hall. Because I want my privacy, I open my female cousin's bedroom door and walk in, put her music on softly and leave silently after I slam the door. I then crept down the hall a little more, into my male cousin's room and then rolled under his bed, an amazing feat but then again I'm a twig, and just started messaging back and forth with my boyfriend back home. I let the boyfriend know what was happening. I laugh it off because I'm inherently suspicious of any man or woman I don't know. We're making jokes about him flying down here and beating the repairman up, but then I hear footsteps down the hall. It's like, the bathroom is right next to the computer and the only thing down here is the bedrooms. What did he want? I hear my female cousin's door open and he goes inside. Since she has laminate, I can hear him walking around. Her bathroom door creaks and I hear him pull it open, then leave the room. He was definitely looking for something or someone. My cousin's door creaks open and he steps inside the room I'm currently hiding in. Thankfully my cousin has a lot of shit under his bed so I wasn't found. This dude is muttering to himself as he opens the bathroom, the closet, then leaves again, walking around the house. I'm freaked out at this point, but it gets way worse. A car pulls up outside and it doesn't have the familiar sound of my uncle's truck. A phone rings and this dude picks up. No, I can't find her. I think she left or something. There's a pause and I furiously message my boyfriend, thoroughly and utterly spooked unawares. Fine, but they're gonna be back any minute. Move fast. I can't believe this is happening. People enter the freaking house. I couldn't tell how many footsteps, but I later learned it was 2 sets. I stupidly roll out from under the bed so I can grab the phone on my cousin's nightstand. I couldn't use mine because it's a Canadian phone and fuck roaming charges, you know? I'm about to dial 911 and then I get the moment of, oh fuck, I'm in a different country. What's the number for the men or women with the blue shirts and beady sticks and guns? So basically I'm holding this pizza-shaped phone going shit. When 3 dudes walk into the room. More repairmen? I asked them, trying very hard to play dumb. Right now my boyfriend is messaging me like mad because I sent him, about to call 911, might die, if I delete my internet history. And haven't messaged back since. I'm holding a phone and look very pale and shaky, which isn't good because they know I know what they're up to. They just file into the room and I have never been more glad to hear, "What the F are you doing?" So my brother walks in, soaking wet, holding a surfboard, looking very menacing, and these dudes are cornered as hell. They start making excuses and by the time their sorry asses are done trying to explain why they've trapped a very scared-looking teenage girl in a bedroom, my overprotective uncle shows up holding a bag of milk and some frozen curly fries. He flips shit, much beating ensues. Story 13. Phone call from my mom. I've been lurking here for a long time, and I posted an encounter once under a throwaway, but I just remembered this one and thought I would share. In 2012, I was living in a suburb of a small city with my boyfriend and 2 daughters, in an apartment complex in a pretty nice neighborhood. I was attending college and my boyfriend worked in the city, but because I was a young mother in college, I didn't really have a lot of friends at school and the majority of my friends and family lived about an hour away. One weeknight, at about 2 to 3 a.m., I woke up to my phone ringing from a restricted number, and it was a woman crying. "Unsweet undersweet? It's your mom, please come get me." I immediately got up and started getting dressed. My mom has had problems with drugs in the past and I love her, but I wouldn't put it past her to get herself in a bad situation. As I mentioned, my family lived an hour away, but I knew she had friends near me. I was too tired and alarmed to really worry about why she had called me restricted. "Where are you?" I asked, and she replied that she was in the city close to me. I pressed her for more details, and she just kept saying, "Please hurry, come get me now." For some reason, it started to seem suspicious. The voice was cracking and it sounded less like my mother and more like a man trying to disguise his voice, and they were pushing too hard for me to just leave my apartment and start driving without any general direction to head in. Whoever it was just kept saying that I needed to leave right now, and I think they may have said something about a car breaking down, or that they were waiting for me in a car. At the time, my mom didn't have a car or very reliable access to transportation, so in a moment of clarity I grasped onto it and I asked, as nonchalantly as possible, "Are you in your car or somebody else's?" They said, "I'm in my car, have you left?" I screamed, "My mom doesn't even have a car, you fucking psycho," and hung up. My boyfriend was awake by this point and he said that I should have played along once I knew it wasn't my mother so he could go out and find out who it was, but I was too shaken up at the moment to do anything but respond with absolute anger. I never found out who it was. They called back a few minutes later and my boyfriend answered the phone and whoever it was just breathed into it for a while before hanging up. Whoever the fuck called me that night, let's not meet. Story 14. When I was 12, a man came to the door selling candy at 10 o'clock at night. When I was about 12 in the early 1980s, my dad once again got custody so I went to live with him. My dad would occasionally go out at night on weekends with a hot date, etc., and leave me home alone. I enjoyed it because I felt grown up. No babysitter. I usually had a friend stay over or my brothers were there and so it wasn't scary. One time though, I was alone, and it got really scary. I also enjoyed being home alone on weekend evenings because it gave me time to catch up on all of the latest rated R movies, which my dad would otherwise not allow me to watch, of course. This particular night, I was watching Conan the Barbarian as it had just landed on HBO. I had the lights dimmed in the living room. About 10 p.m., the movie is about halfway over and there is a very loud knock on the front door. I was too short to use the peephole, so I asked, "Who's there?" A man's voice says loudly, "You want to buy some candy?" It was 10 o'clock at night. I replied, "No thanks." 10 seconds go by, I'm leaning with my ear on the door. He beats on the door again, startling me, and I jump. "Do you want to buy some candy? Open the goddamn door." I said, "No, go away." He curses repeatedly. His voice sounded like a cross between Samuel L. Jackson and Ving Rhames. He leaves, but not for long. Confused, shocked, I just go stand in the hallway, listening. The rest of the house is a fortress, and my dad was safety conscious with always checking window locks, doors, etc., afraid of being burglarized. When I would sometimes forget my house key, I was screwed because there was no way to sneak in. We lived in a cookie-cutter development in a very safe suburban area, but during the day it was a ghost town. Parents were at work, kids were all in school. There were a lot of burglaries, as I recall. I was so shaken with fear when I realized how late it was and he's selling candy. I could not go back to watching my movie. I turned on all the lights and hid behind the couch. I think he is gone. Suddenly, the man then starts ringing the doorbell repeatedly, ding dong, for probably a solid minute. I'm frozen with fear behind the couch, clutching a steak knife. That was an adult at the door, not some friends or kids playing a joke. He never came back after that doorbell episode. I never told my dad about it either, nor my brothers. I don't know why. It was so messed up that I pushed it out of my mind. As time went by, it seemed to be more like a bad dream. I don't know what would have happened if I had opened that door. Our house was on a corner lot by a busy connecting street. We had some other issues there. Later in life, when I was just out of high school, we had a prowler who left signs that he had been stacking our lawn chairs against the wall in order to climb on the roof and peer into our bedroom windows at night. Story 15. The man outside my window. Over 10 years ago, I used to live on a peninsula in Norway. It was quite idyllic actually, as me, my sister, and my mom lived within walking distance of a beach. We had a short and incredibly narrow driveway that led to the house, and the only window in the house facing the driveway was my bedroom window. Important. I was about 9 or 10 at the time when the incident happened. I was in the living room watching a show on Jetix. I think it was around 6 to 7 p.m., as it got dark pretty fast at that time of the year, January. I had been sitting there for hours when my mother told me to go to my bedroom and watch TV as we were having guests soon. I grabbed my things and went inside my room. I remember the room felt really cold, so I turned on the heater and went back out to the living room to get my candy or something like that. On my way out the door, a sudden feeling of dread washed over me, and I had this feeling that someone had been watching me. I don't know how to explain this feeling, but it was as if I subconsciously could see someone outside my window from the corner of my eye, but did not realize it until I grabbed the door handle. I turned around quickly and glanced at the window. Nothing. I felt really stupid and brushed it off as me just being paranoid or dramatic. I got my candy and went back into my room. The first thing I noticed was that my bedroom window had been slightly opened, and I didn't remember opening it. I figured maybe Mom did it. Suddenly, I heard a sort of scratching sound outside my window, and this time I froze still. I couldn't process what was going on. There was a person outside my window. His face was glued to the glass, and he was holding his hands on each side to get a better look inside my room. As my window was quite far up when standing outside, I could only see his head. For a brief second I thought maybe he was one of the guests Mom was talking about, but I had never seen him in my entire life. He was just staring at me. I couldn't move, or maybe I could but I didn't want to. I was too scared. He looked like he was in his 40s, and I remember him having really dark circles under his eyes. He just stood there for what felt like an eternity, and then suddenly widened his eyes and continued to stare. This scared the crap out of me, and I managed to shout, "Mom." The man panicked and disappeared quickly. As I was in the middle of telling my mom that this man was standing outside my window, our doorbell rang. My mom answered the door and wouldn't let me out in the hallway to see who it was. I just remember her looking uneasy when she came back. A few months later, the same man was arrested and charged with murder after his neighbors complained about a horrific smell coming from his apartment. The police discovered the decomposing body of a 13-year-old girl in the attic who had been murdered by him. She was last seen in her bedroom and had been missing for several days. After all these years, my mom told me what the man said at the door. He told her that someone had ordered takeout, and he wanted to check if it was the right address. This being a small peninsula, she recognized him from a small vegetable shop and realized he was lying. She got scared and quickly told him no one had ordered anything. A year later we moved to the city, and only now I fully understand why. I truly believe that if my mom had not been there, I would not be alive today. Sometimes I feel guilty for the girl's death and wonder if she would be alive and well today if I had been taken instead. Story 16. I can see you, boy. This happened on a Sunday night when I was about 10 years old, in the mid-90s. My family house was on a short street, a dead end created by a railroad track. We had a 3-story house, which was the farthest from the tracks, with windows on every floor, 2 in the basement. The stairs from our bedrooms upstairs led directly to the front door, which connected to a closed-in mudroom/porch, which also had a screen door and a glass door that only locked from the inside. Even friends and extended family would wait outside to be let into the porch, as that's where the doorbell was. From inside the porch, you could see right up the stairs through the window in the door. Across the house, parallel to the front door, was the back door. Both had a large window in them. It must have been June because my older brother had a soccer game and I only had a week of school left. I personally found watching him struggle on the field and being forced to cheer while being eaten by bugs really boring, and I had just gotten a box set of Unimorph books I desperately wanted to be alone with. After about an hour of reasoning and pleading, I finally convinced my parents to let me stay at home alone for the first time while they went to the game. They were only going to be gone for a few hours, and although we didn't live in the best neighborhood, our neighbors were close family friends. I'd be fine. Mistake. Usually before a game we'd all go out and eat together, but since I was staying home, they ordered a pizza from down the street, my brother's favorite. I'd already been face deep in the first book for half an hour when the doorbell rang. Pizza. I walked out from my bedroom and down the stairs to the living room. I got to the bottom of the stairs, and my father was at the door having a conversation with the delivery guy. They were talking about soccer, so I just decided to take the pizzas and keep on keeping on. Which was when I noticed the delivery guy staring at me intently. He was a middle-aged Caucasian with an accent, and he was smiling at me in a way I recognized. It was the same smile I had on my face when I told my parents I was old enough to spend the evening in the house alone. Fake, but convincing. I walked past him through the living room to the kitchen and through the pizzas on the counter and shoved my face into my book. My father talked to him for a few more minutes about sports, and then closed the door. My family sat down to eat and chat while I forgot all about them, the food and the delivery guy. Before they left, around 6:30 p.m., my parents wrote down all the emergency numbers, gave me instructions not to open the door, and headed out with my brother, and I waved them off, excited to finally have the house to myself, if only to read in silence. I locked the main door and headed up to my room to read. It was blissfully quiet, save for the sound of my dog's occasional barking in the backyard. I had just finished the first book, and immediately started on the next when the doorbell rang. The doorbell rang, and my dog lost his shit in the backyard. I was up in my bed immediately. I looked at my alarm clock for the first time since they left. It read 8 p.m. My whole family was at the game, and any extended family in the province was as well. No one would be coming over without calling, especially on a Sunday night. The doorbell rang again. And again. I remained frozen in place, my book crumpling in my shaking hands. I, for the first time, was completely alone and terrified. My sly kid smile flashed in my mind. I thought I was so clever convincing my parents I wasn't scared to be alone. And then another smile flashed in my memory. The pizza guy. And then the banging started. Loud successive bangs that rattled me if not the house. And now from the backyard my dog was livid. I could hear him barking and whining at the back door. I wanted to call someone, but the only phone was in the kitchen, which involved walking right past the front door. Trapped like rats. I panicked. I was scared to leave my room, as my feet would be visible to whomever it was once I entered the hallway. But what if it was just a neighbor, or an untimely Jehovah's Witness? I checked the alarm clock again and was surprised that only minutes had gone by, and my parents wouldn't be back for an hour and a half minimum. I'd have to wait it out. So I did. I got up as silently as possible and closed my bedroom door. Eventually, all the barking, ringing, and banging stopped. I waited for half an hour, and then opened my door and crept out of my bedroom. Mistake. I crept down the hallway to the top of the stairs, trying to press myself into the far wall, as out of sight as possible. But all the lights were on, and I realized that it was obvious that someone was home. I peered quickly down the stairs and the window, looking through it to the glass porch door, and saw no one. Sweet fucking Jesus, no one was there. I tore down the stairs and ran for the back door and checked outside. Nothing but my dog, who was all too happy to run inside. I let him in through a crack and slammed the door after him, locking it. And I realized it hadn't been locked before. Mistake. I turned to the phone, grabbing it and about to dial my neighbor's number, when my dog started acting like he was going to the vets. A low growl accompanied by a crouch, backing away. I froze and looked in his direction, then followed his gaze to the window in the inner front door, where inside my porch, past the front screen and glass doors, stood a man I've never seen before. And he was staring at me, livid. I froze, paralyzed with fear as I looked at him, and I couldn't look away. He was tall, slim, and had bags under his eyes. His hair was shoulder length and unkempt. He lifted his hand and placed it on the window, and then looked down as he tried to turn the knob. Twice. But it was locked. I came out of my paralysis the second his eyes left mine, and I moved quickly to the side of the wall that led to the basement stairs. It blocked us from being able to see each other. Hiding. Hiding felt good. My dog, still in the corner, inched towards me, low to the ground and still growling. I couldn't breathe, my heart was pounding, this couldn't get any worse. Wrong. I saw you, boy. I saw you. Open the door. My stomach nestled in my throat, I started crying. Trapped like more rats. I've never really had a flight or fight moment. Only flight or flight. But there was nowhere to go. Back upstairs led right past him, and going down into the basement seemed even more terrifying, as I'd have to walk past the window in the middle of the staircase that looked out into the alley leading to my backyard. I saw you, you can't hide forever. You have to pay, you have to pay. He screamed through the door window, shaking the door as he pulled on it. I thought he would just break the window and unlock the door, so I descended slowly down the steps to the basement, going halfway just to put some distance between us. Mistake. I stood still, waiting. And then silence. For a minute, nothing. And then the sound of the glass door and screen door to the outside opening and slamming. More silence. My dog straightened out, walked over to the top of the stairs, and then looked right past me. And started growling. I can still see you. I see you. I see you, boy, and you have to pay. I jumped and turned my head, and through the window to the alley I saw his face. He was laying on the ground, staring at me. I see you. I know you're home. I see you. Nope, bye. I bolted up the stairs, to the inner front door, ripped it open and then locked the glass door to the porch, and backed up into the living room, closing the main door behind me, locking that too. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the phone, unplugged it, and turned back around. He was at the door again, this time outside the porch. I steeled myself and ran up the stairs with the phone, dog in tow, to my parents' bedroom, which was the only room with a working phone jack and a lock on their door. And then the doorbell started to ring. I closed and locked their door behind me, left their light off, and plugged in the phone. I dialed my neighbors and got their answering machine. I dialed again, machine. Every ring of the phone was matched by a ring of the doorbell. I called them over and over, finally whispering a message. Tom, it's Kevin, a man is trying to get into the house and I'm alone. I peered out of my parents' window and looked down into the front yard. He was still there, pacing, walking up and down the stairs, looking in the windows, walking out of sight as he entered the alleyway, and then back into the front. I noticed my neighbor's car wasn't there, they weren't even home, and it still hadn't occurred to me to call 911, so I hunkered down and waited with my dog, watching from the corner of the window. He walked back up to the porch, tried the door, and then the doorbell went off a few more times. And then he walked down the stairs and headed back out onto the street. He walked a bit down the sidewalk away from the dead end, towards the main road, and then stopped and turned around, walking back towards the house. He stopped again and looked up, directly at the window I was looking through, but the room was dark, he couldn't see me. Instead of turning back around, he continued walking down the street and crossed the street when he reached the train tracks. He walked back up the other sidewalk, staring at my house all the while, and kept going until he reached the main intersection and turned the corner. I stood in the corner of the window, watching the street for what seemed like hours, until my parents' car pulled up in front of the house, along with the neighbor's car. They all got out and my mother headed towards the house while my father started chatting with the neighbor's husband. Those fuckers had left me with an emergency contact number for somebody that wasn't going to be home because they were going out together. I unlocked the door and booked it downstairs, instantly crying with relief as I unlocked the inner door, and then the glass porch door. I recounted the night's events to my parents in the kitchen through tears, and they had just started to calm me down. And that's when the doorbell rang. I started to shake and cry again, and my father burst out of his seat and barreled towards the door, and swung it open. And there he was. The man. He stood there smiling a disgusting smile, and I immediately took off down into the basement. My mother was right behind me. I heard my father and him arguing loudly for a few minutes, and then my father slamming the door. My father called my mother and I back upstairs, and then after I made him promise the man was gone, I walked up and into the kitchen. My father sat me down and explained the situation. Earlier, my father hadn't had enough cash on him for the pizzas. He had told the delivery guy that he would be back in 4 hours, but had to make the game and didn't have time to get more cash. The delivery guy agreed, wished my brother good luck in his game, and then had passed the message on to the guy who would be working the closing night shift. That delivery guy had misunderstood, thinking that he was to return immediately and collect payment. He explained it all to my father as if he had rang the doorbell a few times and then had left. Not that he had been circling the house terrifying me for over an hour. He told my father he wasn't sure if anyone was home, so he looked around back, but only saw my dog, so he left, only returning, coincidentally, minutes after my parents returned, armed with a convincing story. Kids have such an imagination, sorry that I frightened him. I called bullshit, but my parents didn't believe me. Suffice it to say, I brought my books with me to every soccer game after that. Story 17. Being watched while camping in the deep woods. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of people where I live are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there too long, without anything else going for you, at least. Excluding a handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees, the only employment in the area is at Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes, there are really shifty people hanging around these trailheads or just driving around on the Forest Service roads. These are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat-up $500 cars just barreling along roads meant for a 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All that being said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, two of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the national forest. Probably not legal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drove a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a bit dark, and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road, and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running and we set up the tent. As we were setting up the tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of home and garden insecticide. I was really tired at the time, and I just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that is more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we're eating, we notice a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be a bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was kind of like that glow you see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light source itself, though. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it wasn't for other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us, Jacob and I, decided to take a look. My other friend, Isaac, decides to stay behind to pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seemed strange that a beaver would go around all these trees and just knock the bark off in a circle. Jacob and I start talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top of the hill, Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh shit!" A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We look at each other and decide that maybe we don't need to see what that light was after all. We walk back in silence and keep looking back every few seconds. We decide to turn off our flashlight and just use the moonlight to get back to the campsite. When we get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before. For some reason, he's carrying his paintball gun around in his hand. That seemed a little odd, we said to each other. The fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. At this point, we'd probably been gone for almost an hour. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering in the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to go use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, he had a few more rum and cokes, he mumbles. We ask him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. They're locked up in the cab of the truck. Did you unlock it? We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see all our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnetic fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Isaac, what were you doing after we left? I ask. I was watching a movie on my phone, then I fell asleep, I guess. But, you were walking around with your paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? Isaac said he had been in the tent since we left, and that he had been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us are way too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent, we just fold it down with the sleeping bags and everything in it. We jump in the F-150, and I start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the hump earlier. By this point, all of us have sobered up to the situation. No one wants to get out of the car to try to move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of the F-150, so I drove forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off, it must have just been balanced on top, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects light off it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road, and the other vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though, it stays just 1 or 2 turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we made it back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decide to go a different way just to be safe. I didn't get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I've driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. I would never go down that road again though. Story 18. A man lived in my garage and tried to climb through my window. I will never understand how someone could do some of the messed up things they do. Especially when they do these things to children. It was 2 years ago when my story went down. A little background. I was 15 when this happened. I'm a girl, and I've always been sort of paranoid and afraid of my own shadow. Before school, I had made a promise that I was going to walk through the woods after school. There are rather large woods behind my school. It leads right behind my house, but it's a good 15-minute walk through the woods. It would have taken less time to just have my best friend, Sam, drive me like she usually does, but earlier in the morning Sam had teased me about being scared of everything, and I wanted to prove I wasn't. So I began the journey by myself, trudging through the fallen leaves and nearly tripping over just about a dozen fallen sticks. About 5 or so minutes into the woods, I couldn't see my school or any sign of civilization, which surprised me because I didn't think I was that deep. That's when I started to get a little weary. I tried to pick up my pace, but I'm so clumsy that if I went any faster I would trip over all the things on the forest floor. When I passed by 2 huge fallen trees, I heard something very distinct. It was a moan. Growing up being a scaredy cat with a daredevil best friend, I figured right away Sam was just trying to scare me. So I called out, "You don't scare me," and walked over to the other side of the logs. What I saw made me freeze in shock. It was a man, a very dirty man with baggy clothing. His huge jeans were down to his ankles, and he was leaning against the log, tugging fiercely at his dick. I tried to scream, I tried to run, but I was just so shocked and confused that I couldn't do anything but stare at him. He smiled at me and moaned my name. He literally moaned my name, Maggie, a man I had never met before, a man who, there is no way he could have known my name. That's when I finally was able to move, and I took off running, tripping and then standing a few times as I went. I was screaming bloody murder, and I heard him yell, "Maggie," in a very deep voice. I didn't turn back to see if he was following me. I just burst from the woods, ran into my house and into my room, locking the door behind me. I was ashamed and scared. For some reason I thought my parents would be mad at me if I told them. So even though my mom and dad tried to get me out of my room, I stayed in it all evening. Eventually I fell asleep. Fast forward to about midnight, maybe a little earlier. I hear a sort of grunt, and that makes my eyes snap open. Again I'm frozen with fear. That man that was jerking off and moaning my name in the woods was at my window. He had it opened. He wasn't coming inside, he was just grinning at me, with his head in the open window. I couldn't scream, I couldn't get up, I couldn't even reach the BB gun I had sitting on the floor next to me to shoot at him. He was chuckling softly and he said, "You make me come so hard, baby girl." I started crying hysterically. I still couldn't find my voice or make my limbs work. I had never been so afraid in my life, and I was pretty sure I was going to be raped or murdered or both, but I still couldn't do anything to protect myself. But after what was only a minute or two, but felt like forever, I had managed to choke out, "Please go away." This made him laugh more. And then he said, "Please go away," in a false girl voice while he laughed. He was literally mocking me in my open window because he knew I was too afraid to do anything. But it was when he started to climb in that I began screaming at the top of my lungs. He tumbled backwards and took off through the yard, and my parents burst into my room shortly after. All I could do was yell, "Man in the window," and my dad literally dove out of the window and I could hear him yelling. He didn't catch him though, the man had too much of a head start. And we think he had a car, which is most likely the reason that they couldn't find him, because there were tire tracks in the very front of our yard that lead to the road. After my dad came back in and the cops showed up, my mom had called them, I told them about the woods and then exactly what happened. They searched around and found a sort of nest in the storage room above our garage, where he had been sleeping. After he had tried to get in through my window, he never came back. It's been 2 years and I'm still not okay. I get panic attacks sometimes and I will never go into another woods again. And why he had been in the woods in the first place, I will never know. My theory is that when Sam had teased me and I told her after school I would go through the woods, that he heard us. We had been walking past the garage to get into Sam's car, so I think he heard us and went into the woods later that afternoon, hoping to catch a glimpse of me. The whole thing makes me feel wrong and confused. Story 19. 4 a.m. car cleaning. I felt I had to share this encounter, because honestly I never thought I'd experience something like this myself. Sure, I've read all the no-sleep posts and freaked myself out, but this was different. This wasn't a scary monster or even a ghost. This was a close call, or so I believe. Some quick background leading up to the night in question. I am graduating from university tomorrow, so I was determined to get an early night. I'd gone round to my friends for a wee spliff, but don't get me wrong, I'm not a pothead. It was more of a celebration. Anyway, I remembered I had to take Mum to the hospital. Nothing serious, but she had to be taken and picked up. Then I remembered we'd rolled the joint in the car. Disaster, she'd smell and see it everywhere, so I made a mental note to stop and vacuum the car. We have a 24-hour petrol station really close to us, but it's sort of on its own, as in there are no houses or buildings around. I pull in and look over to the shop. They use a hatch after 12 and don't allow you inside, but I didn't need anything. It had just ticked over 4 a.m. and I had to be up at 10 a.m., so I wanted to just get this done and get out of here. The vacuum machine was behind the coal shed, but it was well lit. I cranked on some music on my phone and got to work. £1 for 4 minutes of vacuuming, not bad I thought. No one else was in the parking lot except one white van, but the guy inside was yelling wildly into his phone. Not loudly, just making a lot of gestures. I felt for him, probably some guy who has been driving all night, but hey, I cracked on with the work at hand. Then I looked over again and caught his eye. He looked away and I laughed. Love at first sight, I thought to myself. I was in an amazing mood. Then it started to get weird. The summer sun was already starting to rise and the street lights went out, including those illuminating the petrol station. It wasn't that dark, but it was noticeably creepier and I was keen to really get a move on. I stared over at the van and saw the man watching me again, still talking on his phone, but then something happened that I really freaked out at. I saw someone lean forward from the other seat and peek round the guy, then immediately slam themselves back against the seat. That's when I realized the guy on the phone was in the passenger seat and wasn't driving. I hadn't noticed it when I drove in, but I shrugged it off and set the vacuum cleaner back, ready to leave. I threw all my stuff back into my car and went to unlock the door when a voice said, "Excuse me." I swear I nearly shat myself there and then. My heart was absolutely pounding, but I recognized the voice. The petrol station was a Spar. the same chain of stores I work in, and the guy who'd spoken was my old supervisor. He'd moved to the 24-hour store not too long ago. He began to shout at me for using the vacuum so late at night. The two guys in the van just sat and watched us as if waiting for him to go away. Then he said something to me that made this whole situation real. "I'm going to have to ask you to come inside. We aren't allowed to let customers past 11, even in stores that are open until 12. This is a big no-no, especially as I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong." I allowed him to lead the way, and the moment we were in the store, he put the shutter down. He told me he'd been watching the guys in the van, and they'd been sitting there for nearly 3 hours. Little did I know, my old supervisor saw someone get out of the back of the van and, as he described it, put a bit of masking tape across a few zeros in their number plate, effectively creating a new one. I began to panic. Looking outside, I noticed the van was gone. After checking the CCTV, it was shown that they sped away the minute I was taken into the store. We called the police and they examined what little footage was there immediately. They took the tape and thanked us for bringing it to their attention. At one point on the CCTV, the guy who got out of the back of the van turned to get back in, and it looked like he had a knife in his hand. I realize I sound dramatic, and this story isn't exactly thrilling, but I cannot imagine what would have happened if my old supervisor hadn't been looking out for me. I'm never vacuuming at 4 a.m. anymore, that's for sure. Story 20. Horrific night camping. Let me start by saying, first post on this sub, so if I dickered up anything please tell me and I'll fix it. Also, for reference, I was a 19-year-old female at the time. Still female of course, just a little older. I love camping. Anytime my friends and I came home from college, we would load up our cooler with beer, grab some gear and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends ever wanted to go with me, so I would often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed some of my gear, hopped in a car I borrowed from a buddy, and drove to a spot that was secluded yet within a safe distance to civilization that I could run and get help. Camping also creeps me out sometimes, but that creepy feeling is also somewhat of a plus for me. It's the same reason that people read these stories. It's fun to be scared. So I make a little camp and get a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much to eat, but I was enjoying myself, reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling I was being watched and I stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to my right, then see a doe bolt from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to the camp with the armful of wood I had gathered. I kept freaking myself out, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whittling at a stick I had been messing with. Around 1 I decide to go into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I had been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars. Another reason I like camping, I can act however I want, so I passed out relatively quickly. About 2 o'clock I start hearing footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I think to myself that it's a deer or other animal, more likely a raccoon because I had probably left some food out. I'm still on guard though. About 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open, I hear a rubbing noise, and the tent fabric is being pushed in a bit. I don't know how I didn't shit my sleeping bag, but I just sat there paralyzed with my K-bar in my hand. I desperately wanted to thrust the knife through the tent fabric, but I was still holding out hope that it was some of my buddies from a frat joking with me. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it all stopped. I was starting to feel slightly more secure, because daylight would be coming in about 2 or 3 hours. But I sure as shit wasn't going to go to sleep. All of a sudden, at about 4 o'clock, I realized I should put my boots on so that if anything did happen, I would be ready. After having stayed up and keeping alert a little while longer, my friend's car alarm goes blaring. I freaked the fuck out and run out of the tent. I got about 2 steps before something grabs me around the mouth. I open my mouth to scream, but instead the person's pinky finger slips between my teeth. I've heard that people can perform superhuman feats when they have huge adrenaline rushes. In my case, I just clamped down and, there's no way to say this without sounding ridiculous, his finger popped off. He screamed, pulled his hand away with the missing digit falling to the ground. He took off running down the hill I was camping on. I took off right quickly in the opposite direction. I must have looked ridiculous to the people whose house I ran to, a little sorority girl in a wife beater, boxers, and steel toe boots. I also had some blood that had oozed out of my lip, not from the finger, but because I had also managed to take a pretty good chunk out of my lip as well. I told them what happened, they called the police, got me some real clothing, and the man at the house made me a whiskey and Coke. When the cops got there, they checked it out. The cops went to check it out, and when they came back it was light out. They brought me back so I could get my friend's car, and what I saw just made me more scared. Right next to the tent was a red gas can. He could have just lit me on fire earlier. The finger was also gone, suggesting he had come back. The kicker is they never caught the guy, so somewhere out there is a man sitting down to dinner, maybe alone, maybe with a wife and a couple of kids, and he's missing his right pinky. Story 21. Woods of northern Wisconsin. A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in Chequamegon National Forest in northern Wisconsin. And after our experience, we do not plan to return unless we go with a large group of people. My girlfriend and I are from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin was our go-to place for R&R. We've done a number of hiking trips in northern Wisconsin and in the Up, but never to this area. We are not backpacking experts, but we have been to a number of national parks and have been out hiking and exploring when we can find time away from work. We love getting away from people and relaxing in nature. But this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike a remote section of the North Country Trail. The North Country Trail is a national scenic trail, like the Appalachian Trail, but it gets much less use. In some parts of northern Wisconsin, the trail is very remote, and the only access is via logging roads. We planned to hike 15 miles along the trail to a backpack shelter, spend the night, and hike back to the car the following day. We spent the night at a friend's house in Wausau, and we set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we entered the national forest boundary, we were captivated by the beauty of the thick green forests. I drove slowly along the gravel logging roads as we made our way to our parking spot. While we were driving to the trailhead, we passed a couple of people standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to be hillbillies, as they had a rusted-out, bunged-up pickup truck, complete with Confederate bumper stickers. As we drove past, I waved, and they stared back without returning the greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself. After we passed them, I looked in the rearview mirror and noticed they were still staring at us. And before we rounded a bend, I glanced back into the mirror again, and saw them watching us through the haze of road dust. My girlfriend and I joked about the up north people, but we did not think anything of the encounter. Aside from those people, we did not encounter anyone else on the remote logging roads within the national forest boundary. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later, after winding our way on the narrow logging road. There was no one else parked at the trailhead, a perfect chance to get some needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. After parking and making sure the car was locked, we hoisted our packs and set off on the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and biting flies at bay. We took pictures along the way, and we marveled at the lushness of the forest and the topography of the glacial moraine. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found our campsite. It consisted of a wooden backpack shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided ample space for us, we opted to set up our tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter fire ring, and I boiled water for our dehydrated trail food. As we ate, we watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed around a Nalgene filled with wine, and we marveled at how many stars you could see away from the city. When the fire was reduced to a small pile of glowing embers, we decided to head back to the tent. We settled into our tent and looked through the pictures we took that day. But after lugging a heavy pack for 15 miles and drinking some wine, I was ready for some shut-eye. When we camped at state and national parks, I usually wore earplugs. But that night, there were no RVs or other campers to make noise, so I closed my eyes and let the noise of the forest lull me to sleep. My girlfriend was very uneasy that night, but she normally had some apprehension whenever we were sleeping away from home. I'm not sure when we drifted to sleep, but we awoke to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insects in the forest, I heard a dull thud. It sounded like someone was hitting two logs together. My girlfriend and I were wide awake at this point, and we lay silently in our tent hearing the noise again. Our old tent had a mesh window, but the backpacking tent we were using had no window. We could only guess at what was making the noise outside our tent. We initially thought that an animal got at our food and garbage bag, which we left in the shelter, but the noise was too distinct, and it did not sound like rustling through food wrappers or our camp equipment. Our hearts were pounding as we heard the persistent knock in the darkness. Unarmed and scared shitless, we did not know what to do. I would normally have carried a can of bear spray, but I decided to leave it at home to save on weight, against the wishes of my girlfriend. The knocking continued, but we remained still so as to not give away our location. For all we knew, whatever was making the noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed like an eternity, the knocking sound ceased. We lay in complete silence with only the dull buzz of the insects in the background. Then we heard it. Leaves rustling, a branch breaking. Voices. We heard low talking in the distance. We could not make out what was being said, but it sounded like a couple of people talking in the distance. The voices continued for a bit, but to our relief, the voices did not seem to be getting louder. Whoever was out there did not spot the tent or decided to leave us alone. We sat in our tent for the rest of the night, adrenaline surging through our veins. At the first light, we slowly got out of the tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anyone was out there, but I only saw the forest and the backpack shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and camp pads and put our tent away. When we got to the shelter, my girlfriend screamed in horror. On the entrance to the shelter, the wood was freshly cut. The word "kill" was cut into the shelter wall, and there were a number of axe/knife cuts where someone was chopping at the wall. I looked at the ground and saw a scattering of fresh wood splinters. After grabbing our food supply and garbage bag, we got the hell out of there. We were nearly jogging with our gear as we made our way back to the car. I kept glancing back over my shoulder and gazing out through the woods to see if anyone was following us. We traversed the glacial eskers that we saw the day before, and we knew we were getting close to our car. We were quietly rejoicing as we neared the trailhead. We made it back to the trailhead in near record time. But something was wrong. The windshield wiper on my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck to the wiper. As we inched closer to the car, I saw there was blood smeared on the windshield and a squirrel carcass was impaled on the wiper blade. Hair and blood still stuck to the wiper and on the hood of the car. I didn't bother cleaning off the car. We threw our gear in the trunk and I sped off without removing the animal from the wiper blade. As I sped down the gravel logging road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but I could not see anything through the cloud of road dust behind the car. When we got to a gas station by the nearest town, I removed the carcass with a wad of newspaper, and I tried to remove as much dried blood as I could. I filled up on gas and we didn't stop until we made it to Milwaukee. This was the last trip I took to the woods of northern Wisconsin. Story 22. Burrow the Gibbon. This happened in Thailand in 2014. I had lost my job in Zurich and decided to use the opportunity to make a trip around the world, starting with Southeast Asia. I have always wanted to work with animals, so after backpacking Vietnam and parts of Thailand, I applied for a volunteer position at an ape sanctuary. They told me I could start whenever I wanted. The deal was that I had to make a deposit of around 20,000 baht, which nowadays translates to a bit more than $500. They told me that if I stayed at least 3 months, I would get 70% of my money back. The early days of working there were wonderful. The place was full of young, motivated people who thought they could save the world, one ape at a time. The majority of the animals were rescued gibbons. Our goal was to nurse them back to health and eventually release them back into the wild. Our responsibilities as volunteers were to feed them, clean their cages, and educate visiting tourists about the horrors of the illegal pet trade in Thailand. Before they came to us, most of the gibbons had been abused as tourist attractions. You know those pictures you see on Facebook from people being on vacation somewhere in Asia, where they hold cute animals into the camera? This is how the poachers make their money. They will put a gibbon, lizard, or slow loris on your shoulder, snap a picture, and charge you for it afterwards. I can tell you that every single one of those animals has been through hell and was or will be killed soon after the photo was taken. The thing is, poachers can only use the babies as tourist attractions. Because as soon as they reach puberty, they become territorial and aggressive and are then no longer of use to them. On average, to get to a single baby, A poacher has to kill 15 other gibbons. This is because they are still attached to their mother at that age. The poachers will shoot her first. Then they will shoot the father because he will be trying to protect them. In most cases, the baby won't survive the fall from the trees, so the poachers have to kill a few more families until one baby lives. Then the real pain starts. They have their fangs ripped out without anesthetics so they can't bite. They will be drugged so they stay awake during the night, when the tourists roam the streets. They will be chained so they can't escape. They will be kept in tiny cages, fed the wrong food, and some will be taught to drink alcohol or even smoke. And as soon as they are no longer of use, they will be left to die. The poachers will then go and find the next baby. As you can imagine, most of the gibbons in that sanctuary were pretty traumatized. But still, working with them was fascinating. They all had their own personalities, including little quirks, preferences, and biases. Most of them were shy. Some only tolerated men near them, some disliked girls with blonde hair, etc. One female took a particular liking to me. Every time I walked by her cage, she would start masturbating furiously. Her boyfriend, who was kept in the same cage, did not seem to care at all though. I spent my days cutting fruit, mixing cement, hosing poo down the drain, and getting bitten by mosquitoes. Even though it was hard labor without any real pay, it was probably one of the best times of my whole trip. We all felt like we were doing something selfless, something noble. It was a truly fulfilling experience. Then, one day, I was scheduled to work in the quarantine area. This is the place that tourists never get to see. It's where they keep the really bad cases. The gibbons there had been damaged beyond hope. They told me some of the things that have been done to them. Unspeakable horrors. All of them were either too sick, too weak, or too aggressive to ever be released back into the wild again. To be blunt, most of them were bat-hit crazy. First, there was Nini. She was hyperactive and showed self-mutilating behavior. You always had to feed her first. If she saw you give food to a different cage before hers, she would flip her shit, rip out her water container, throw herself down to the floor, and start biting at her own arm. She was also kinda mean. The other volunteers had warned me that she would try to startle me. She would hide in a dark corner of her cage, or acting as if she was busy, or sleeping. But as soon as you turned your back to her, she would jump at the bars right behind you with this ear-piercing scream and rattle the fence. I have dropped more than one food basket in this manner. After a few times of that happening, I got sick of her shit. I filled my mouth with water and walked closely by her cage, facing away, just far enough that she could not reach me if she stuck her arm through the wire. As soon as I heard her move, I instantly turned around and spit the water at her. It did not hit her. Gibbons have lightning-fast reflexes, but she never tried to scare me again after that. Then there was one who literally looked and behaved like a zombie. His name was Fanta. He had been blinded by an infection in both eyes. They were white and foggy. Big chunks of his fur had fallen out, giving him a very decrepit appearance. He never swung and only moved by slowly walking along the branches in his cage. You had to rattle his food basket during feeding time so he would know when to come and eat. Another one was called Pam. She was special. They never told me what had happened to her, but she was missing one foot, one hand, and all but 2 fingers on her other hand. You had to cut up her food into really small pieces because she had a hard time eating. She was already old for a gibbon and very calm. Yet there was something out of the ordinary in her eyes. Something intelligent. She was the only gibbon we were allowed to touch. We had to, because we needed to apply cream and powder to her stump. She hated the powder tough and would only allow it if she got a little massage first. Like all the gibbons in this area, she was alone in her cage. I guess she just missed being groomed by a partner. A Thai worker told me the story about how, some years ago, a volunteer who was going to clean her water container found it empty. That was unusual for Pam, because with only 2 fingers, she wasn't really able to drink that fast. He turned the container upside down just to be sure, when a dark green scorpion fell out and crawled away. There were a few more apes in the quarantine area, whose names I have already forgotten. But there is one name that I will never forget: Burrow. Burrow was huge for a gibbon. And strong. If he managed to get a hold of your shirt, he could pull you to the cage and rip it right off your body with one pull. The same thing was true for tufts of hair. While most gibbons get really excited during feeding time, Burrow was different. The first time I approached his cage, he didn't even come down to see what kind of food he would be getting. I could already hear him chew on something up in his cage. Black feathers were floating down from his branch. He had somehow managed to catch a bird, and Burrow was one of the few gibbons who still had his fangs. There was also something wrong with his lungs. He was the only one you could actually hear breathing. And when he sang, which he did not do often, it had this weird, rattling tone to it. Oh, and he was also infected with hepatitis. I can't remember which. And since he liked to throw poo around, his hands were sometimes covered in feces, so you better make sure not to let him scratch you. They had tried to find a girlfriend for him a few times, but it never worked out. It seemed like he just hated other gibbons. And for some reason he really hated me. They had told me that Burrow was not fond of new volunteers. But with me, it was a different level. For example, we used a water hose to clean the cages from feces. The water pressure had to be quite high, because after some time in the sun, the poo would be dry and really stick to the bars of the cage. Gibbons don't like to get wet. That's why most of them hid in one of the top corners while we did the cleaning. During those few minutes, I felt like I was in charge. I did not have to constantly cover my back. One mistake did not mean a new scratch or a urine stain. But to Burrow, the hose meant nothing. Whenever I came close to his cage, he instantly tried to rip it from my hand. He didn't even care if he got soaked. He just cared about catching me or taking something away from me. Whenever I worked in quarantine, I could feel his stare. Whatever I did, he was watching me. Every single time I came close, he tried to grab me. He would hide in the shadows of his little house or behind some branches, then jump at the fence and reach through it. His claws were always exactly at face level. Sometimes just a few inches away, grasping desperately. The tie keepers told me they had never seen behavior like that. One day, a huge spider web appeared overnight between a tree and the cage next to it, blocking my usual path. I am not a fan of spiders and I was behind on schedule, so instead of removing it, I tried going around it. It meant I had to get a little bit closer to Burrow's cage than usual. I thought it was still far enough. It wasn't. I tried to squeeze past the tree with my back to his cage. He caught the collar of my shirt. I was lucky that I was already holding onto the tree, otherwise he could have pulled me to the cage. I heard him hiss behind me as I managed to pull away, my shirt tearing, and me falling face first into the web. I took a little walk afterwards to calm myself down. When I returned, he was quietly sitting in the shadow of his house again, breathing this slow, rattling breath. That was the last time I ever saw him. The things I am about to tell you next, I did not see with my own eyes, but the keepers told us at lunch a few days later. That morning, when the keepers and some volunteers arrived at the quarantine, they felt like there was something wrong. Gibbons usually sing, especially in the early hours of the day. You can hear them from miles away if they give it their all. But this morning it was quiet. The first thing they noticed when they entered the area was a huge red puddle under Fanta's cage. What was left of him was hanging in the feeding area. They found parts of him in his food basket, outside his cage, and on the ground. The second thing they noticed was that Burrow's cage was empty. What had happened was that the part where his little house was screwed to the back of the cage had rusted, and combining its weight with his strength, he managed to rip it out and squeeze himself through the hole it left. Then he must have lured Fanta to the edge of the cage by rattling his food basket. None of the other gibbons were hurt, fortunately. It was partly my fault that he had escaped. The volunteers were supposed to check the integrity of the cages at least once a week. The tool we used for that was a long stick with a metal hook on top. It should have been used to pull at the rusty parts of the grid, to see if they still hold. But that type of work was a pain in the ass. The tool was heavy, the gibbons would always go crazy and grab it, you had to go to places in the area that were hard to reach, etc., so almost nobody cared to do it properly. The team they had to catch gibbons was literally one guy with a blow tube. He was actually a great guy. He taught us how to cook rice in bamboo and he could climb a tree in seconds. But he was also an alcoholic. Almost every night he would down a bottle of Sangsom and then try to find a way into the women's bungalow. Nobody really had any hopes of catching Burrow again, unless he would return to his cage by himself, which some gibbons before him actually did. From the moment they told me that Burrow had escaped, Working in the sanctuary became quite stressful for me. I always imagined him watching me from the trees outside. They went looking for him in the forest, but there was no trace. Not even once we heard him sing in the distance. Still, every time a branch snapped somewhere behind the trees, I twitched. During the next week, we heard that some tourists had been attacked by a wild gibbon. They went out in the forest and looked for the culprit, but nothing came out of it. The following night I was awakened by a familiar sound. At first, I thought it was my roommate snoring. Then I realized it came from the window, which had no glass, only a mosquito net. A slow, rattling breath. It was Burrow. It was pitch black, but I am sure it was him. He was holding his breath every couple of seconds, as if he wanted it to be quiet so he could listen for something. I just lay there, trying not to make any sounds. I thought about what I was going to do if he decided to come inside. My plan was to use my blanket to shield my body. My roommate would surely help. After a few more moments, the rattling breathing stopped one more time. It never resumed. He was gone. The next day, I told our boss that I was leaving. It was not only because of Burrow. Some of the other people that I really liked were leaving too. I just felt like my time there was over. There were many more places in the world I wanted to see. I am sure they were able to afford a few new cages with the money I left them, so I did not feel bad about my decision. I don't know if Burrow ever returned to the sanctuary. When I think about it now, I just feel sorry for him. He was not evil, just a wild animal that had experienced more terrors than most of us can imagine.